In this video, I'm going to go through the steps of securing LogStream itself. We're first going to go through securing the master node, then the worker nodes, and then finally, we're going to go through the steps of securing the communication between those two entities. This table shows many of the options that are available when securing LogStream. The master UI, the APIs, the worker to master communication, all of these by default are not secure, as well as the data coming into LogStream and the data going out of LogStream all can be secured. However, in this video, we are just going to focus on the top three. And in future video, I will focus around securing the data coming in and going out of LogStream. To start the process, I'm going to go to the LogStream documentation and click on the securing section. In here, we can see the command that allows us to generate a self-signed certificate for 420 days, and also the unencrypted RSA private key that we're going to use throughout this demo. Also, if you have your own certificate and key, you can just point LogStream to the location of those entities. So let's start by copying the OpenSSL command that will allow us to generate the key and certificate. Next, we're going to go to the command line and just paste that command that we saw in the documentation and fill in the details that are needed to generate a self-signed certificate. And once we are done with filling in the details, we can see the newly generated certificate and the key. The next step in the process is to go to LogStream, Settings, Certificates, Add New. Let's give it the name of Local Certificate and paste in the content from the certificate and the key that we just generated. And once we save the content from the certificate and from the private key into this section and save it, we can now start using that information to secure LogStream. Also, we can notice that in this point, there is no reference to this certificate. Next, we're going to use this certificate to secure the masternode web and API interface. Click on General Settings, TLS, click Enable, and LogStream automatically will point to the local certificate key and local certificate cert that were generated by us creating this certificate. Also, we can select the default TLS settings, and in my test, since I am using a self-signed certificate, I disabled the validation of server certificates, and I left the other options as defaults. At this point, as soon as we saved the TLS on the master node through the settings, the master node from this point on can be accessed via an HTTPS. At this point, if we go to the HTTPS URL, we should be able to access our secure master node. Next, through the secure URL for the master node, we are going to configure the workers to also use TLS for security. And for this demo, I'm using port 9001 for my workers, just to make it a little clearer. The next step, exactly as we did before on the master node, now on the worker group, we are going to click on the certificates, add a new certificate, and fill in the details with the self-signed certificate that we generated earlier. And as was the case before, we can see that at this point, no one is using this certificate that we just generated. And once we click on the certificate itself, we can also see here on the bottom the details, whether or not any source or destination are using this certificate, or whether or not the APIs are currently using it. Since we just generated it and we have not enabled any TLS, we can see all the values are set to no. So for the next part, I'm going to select General Settings, TLS, enable that TLS, click on the worker certificate that we just generated. Also, we can select the default TLS settings and make sure that the validation is turned off, again, because this is a self-signed certificate, and a few of the other defaults. Once we click Save and commit, we can now go to the worker UI. As I mentioned earlier, it was on port 9001, and see that we are using HTTPS as the way to gain access to this particular worker UI and APIs. And if we go back to the master node at this point and click the certificates, we can see that the API TLS is referencing this certificate. Also, if we want to ensure and further secure the access to the worker nodes, we can click on Advanced and turn on the Disable UI access. Save that and try to access our worker UI. We will get a message that it's forbidden. So this is yet another way to make sure that no one can access the workers directly. Next, if we still want to enable users to access the worker UIs, but through the master and not directly, we can go in, click on the master node settings, distributed settings, select the master settings option, and enable the worker UI access. What this flag allows us to do, it allows us to go to the workers and still access this workers UI, but only through the master node interface. The next part of the demo, we're going to concentrate around the third option, and that is securing the communication between the worker nodes and the master node. For this next part of the setup, we want to first set up the TLS distributed settings on the workers, and only then we will go to the master and set the master with the right distributed TLS settings. We can either do it through the UI, which I will show you in the demo, or we can go in to the LogStream documentation, click on deployment types, distributed deployment, click on environment variables, and use the Cribl dist master URL to set up the TLS settings that are needed on the workers. For example, I can run the command TLS with the TLS private key path to my key and the TLS.cert path to my cert file. This command will then update the workers with the right information. To access the workers directly, we can select the workers subtab, or we can go through the worker group, select the GUID. That will take us directly into the UI of the workers. As we mentioned, we cannot access the workers directly anymore, so we have to go this route, then click on System Settings. Within the system settings of the worker, click on Distributed Settings, select the TLS settings, and select Enabled. You do not have to change anything else. We will add the mutual auth in a second, but at this point, all you need to do is just select Save. As you can tell, at this point, the workers is unable to access the master because the worker TLS distributed setting has been enabled, but we have not done the same thing on the master. So the next part, select the master node settings, click on distributed settings, select the TLS settings, and enable the TLS settings underneath distributed settings in the master node. And once we save that, we can now go back to the workers subtab and see that the workers are available again. And finally, if we wish, we can go to the distributed settings and enable a mutual authentication. This option will enable us to make sure that the client present their certificates for authentication. So to summarize, we first secured the master node and enabled only HTTPS as the access to this interface. We then secured the worker nodes and also disable the option to access the worker nodes UI directly. At that point, we enable the worker nodes to be accessed through the master node and only through the master node UI. And finally, we secured the communication between the worker nodes and the master node, as well as we showed the option to have MTLS, mutual authentication, between the worker nodes and the master node. And I hope this demo is helpful. Thank you.